take the White House gospel that all of these people were going to lose their jobs and, economic doom was going to result?
Well, I think they took the gospel up to a point, and then it started, as we got closer to it, I think people started to realize that some of the stuff they were saying wasn't really adding up, and they were making very specific claims, like the president claiming about janitors not getting paid, and then it turned out it wasn't true. And so I think, but I agree with what Howie was saying, because there actually would be a real impact of this long term if they don't do something about it, and that hasn't really been talked about. I mean, the CBO has projected 750,000 lost jobs in a fragile economy. Instead, the White House is making up stupid stories about janitors and canceling White House tours.
We are borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend, Rich, and yet they can't find a way to keep the White House open for tours.
Yeah, well, that seems to be a classic instance of picking out the most painful possible high-profile cut. But I think there's a hierarchy of blameworthiness in how credulous this coverage was. The local media and local TV was the very worst. If you're the White House, you just send out a press release mentioning a local town or a state where one of these outlets
sure, find a military base.
Yeah, it's going to be on the 10 o'clock news, just regurgitated verbatim pretty much. The network news was next worst, and not so bad was print. Some of it was bad, but you had some really good fact-checking, particularly out of the Washington Post, which blew the whistle on Arnie Duncan's rank exaggeration, and a couple other these stories that didn't pan out. So it all wasn't terrible.
Is it any coincidence, Jim, that the White House is now out on sort of a charm offensive with Republicans in the Senate and in Congress?
Or to put it another way, a 180-degree reverse course of no negotiations to taking them all out to dinner. Yes, I agree with Rich that Glenn Kessler at the Washington Post has been handing out Pinocchios to the White House like candy. And even Howard Schneider in a headline, in a Post story entitled, "White House Seeks New Money for IMF." Okay? In the middle of all this stuff about we can't afford White House tours, the White House is asking for $65 billion for the International Monetary Fund, and as Schneider said, talk about awkward timing. That was the first word of his lines of the story.
The Kimberly Strassel, the Wall Street Journal columnist, pointed out this week we're spending $27 million on a program in North Africa that includes pottery making, pottery lessons.
Yes, well, we can always do that. We can always look at some silly-sounding program in the foreign aid budget, which is a minuscule part of the budget. I mean, let's look a little closer at the Pentagon. And here again, this notion that the president has no choice, you've just got to cut across the board, that is where the leadership issue that Tom Brokaw was complaining about really manifests itself. He can make this less painful.
The other thing, it shouldn't have been a mystery. If the press had just gone and talked to some of these government unions, there's no way they can be fired or furloughed immediately. It was going to take months, and even if you agree with Kirsten that there's a long-term harmful effect, there was no way it was going to happen on a time frame immediately within weeks of the sequester.
All right, coming up next on Newswatch, the media gush over a dictator who's now dead.